Okay, hello everyone. Now this is your first mini lecture, recorded mini lecture for the subject BBMM603 or Organizational Change and Development. And let me just stress that this is a mini lecture. So it's not meant for you to complete or for me to cover all the topics in this particular session. I expect that you will do your own studying on your own outside of class hours and review the lecture slides. So let me just show that to you for a moment. Okay. Um, so as we know, this is our Moodle unit page. So in order for you to be able to review all the content, you would have to go into the session itself and click on and download the this lecture slide. So this one would be the complete content. So the one I'm going to be presenting to you via this recorded video is only about 10 or 12 slides. So please, after you view this video, you can go back and click on the full slides and read the available information there. So as you can see, are these slides that I'm sharing with you right now. Many of them have extra notes, okay, which explains in more detail, in full detail, each slide that I'm presenting. So please go back to that. The other thing you could do is, of course, access the book, because I must say that the best way to review and learn from this unit is actually to combine it with watching these videos as well as reading the textbook. So I expect that you should get access to this textbook. This is actually available online. You'll need to buy it to read the entire text, or you can go to our library to borrow the book itself. So let me go straight into my mini lecture. All right, so the learning outcomes for this particular session is for us to be able to describe what do we mean by organizational development and the difference between that and organizational transformation. We use abbreviations like OD and OT, so please don't be surprised if you see that more often. We will explain the relevance of organizational development and its role within organizations. And then we will assess the environment of organizational transformation and comment on its relevance in today's change environment. Okay. So what is OD? Organizational development is a system-wide application of behavioral science to the planned development and reinforcement of an organization's strategies, structures, and processes. So I just wanted to remind you that this is a higher unit, a higher management unit. And that's why it's usually you should be on your third year when you're taking this unit. And we expect that you would have taken some introductory management courses before taking this unit. A very relevant unit to have studied beforehand, before taking this unit, would be organizational behavior. This is where we study motivation, we study personality. All of this will be relevant to this particular subject of organizational development. Now, there is a difference between organizational development and organizational transformation. Now, organizational development, as indicated in this slide here, is more of a planned process. This usually happens when management is able to identify that something is going to be happening in the future that we need to plan for, that we need to change. The organization is perhaps has to change its strategy in order for it to adapt to this new situation. So that's usually something that can be planned for. Usually the change demanded is something that is not very sudden. It just happens in what we call an incremental basis. So it just happens a steady change, a steady improvement, perhaps, but it's not a very abrupt change. Um, so all of these things these descriptions pertain to the process of organizational development. I want to stress that it is very process oriented. So we know that it's a continuous improvement process. It's not something that there's a goal or an end goal, and then after that, we finish the development or we finish changing. It's an ongoing process. And usually organizational development does not just pertain to just one system or one function. So the change might involve marketing, it might involve operations, finance, etc., different departments within the organization. On the other hand, transformation is something that is very abrupt, something that it's really, really difficult to plan for. Oftentimes, organizations need to react to this particular crisis, perhaps, that is happening. And usually, whatever changes you make there are oftentimes short term. So I think a perfect example would be the current situation now with regards to the coronavirus. So we all know that it's been pretty sudden. Within a few weeks, the government has decided that we need to stop all essential or non-essential operations of businesses, and companies need to go online right away. So this is a really, really great example of how an organization now needs to transform in a very abrupt manner with hardly any time for planning. So it's quite dramatic, as we can see from our surroundings. And we're actually just reacting. A typical example would be CIC, the higher education college that we're currently studying in. And we know that, look, we were not exactly 100% prepared for the situation, but because the crisis came in quite quickly, we had to adapt very, very quickly. So immediately we got into Zoom, this software that we're using right now. We started using Teams, which is a way of collaborating between the lecturers and the management. So it's something quite chaotic because we're still learning these new systems, but really we have no choice. If we don't change or we don't transform, then we may not survive. So that's really the essence of transformation as opposed to organizational development. I must say though, that organizational development is something that we would rather have than transformation. We would rather be able to plan. If we knew that this was going to happen 3 months ago, then we would have made proper plans and proper preparations for our employees to be able to deal with this change, as well as the students as well, right? You students are suddenly thrust and you need to learn and download these applications, and you're saying, okay, how do I use this? It's very, very dramatic and very chaotic. Chaotic means you can't really plan for it, and it's you don't know what to expect. Ideally, if we were in organizational development situation, then you really just need to do some step-by-step planning. We're going to have an orientation on this date. We're going to be learning this software on this date. We'll tackle any questions on this hour, etc., etc. It's a planned process. Okay, let me just go on with that. Okay, so in any change process, we have to realize if we change one aspect of the organization, we often affect other aspects. So to give you an example would be, if we decide, okay, we're going to go online from now on, all the students have to go online to take their classes. But how do we deal with collection of tuition? Okay, so how do we send money from the students? How do we collect money from the students? So that is a financial aspect of the business that obviously has been affected by the decision to go online. So I guess what I'm trying to say is whatever changes you make in terms of your strategy will affect the processes and the structure of the company. Or on the other hand, if you change the structure of a company, like who reports to who, if let's say you've got 2 or 3 departments and you are collapsing them into just one department, that structure will affect your strategy, because then you'll have less managers, and perhaps the way you do business, the processes will also change. So it's something to look at. If you are a change manager, you're trying to manage the change process, you have to look at different aspects of the business. Okay. This next slide is talking about why should we learn organizational development? Why is it worthwhile for us to study it? Well, first of all, as you might know, there's a lot of aspects or a lot of trends happening in terms of globalization. And globalization doesn't just mean that companies are going from one country to another and establishing businesses there. It also means that there's a lot of connection going on. In other words, uh, our lives are connected in more ways than one. And again, a great example would be the current situation. The virus that first happened in China has now affected almost all countries around the world. That is an example of social connectedness of countries, and that's brought about by trade. We know that many employees or people are traveling from one country to another to do business, and therefore there's an unfortunate part of that, which is it brings about some social change in the case of a virus, for example, spreading from one country to another. Um, the other thing about globalization is we are now, especially in Europe, for example, the closeness of the countries there would mean there has to be a very close collaboration between the political governments of each country. So whatever is being done in Italy, for example, to deal with the crisis has to be studied by other countries in Europe to see, okay, what's happening there? What can we do to avoid the pitfalls that has happened in Italy, so we can avoid that crisis that's happening now in Italy. Okay, so information technology is also changing the way we work. Again, a perfect example would be this Zoom conference that we're doing. I'm actually pre-recording this on Zoom, but because of the internet, we can share this recording and play it back. So you need to be able, as a student or as a teacher, you need to be able to learn this new technology and really maximize the capabilities of this in order for us to deal with this global situation. So the other thing that's happening in the management side is, the innovation that's happening in the management side is most organizations are no longer satisfied with having just a manager making decisions or one person making decisions. Nowadays, we are trying to share the decision making. We're trying to get people to involve themselves in the decision making. So even customers, the kind of products that they want, we want their input into the design of these products. So employees need to be consulted in decision making. In the change management process, whoever is affected by change, we want to know how they're feeling. We want to know if they have any ideas on how we can um, uh, implement change, with more efficiently and more effectively among those people that are affected by the change. So perfect, again, example would be using online learning facilities. We need to be in contact with the students, you students, to find out, okay, how are you feeling? Is there anything that we can add to make this experience better, to make this experience less jarring or less emotional, perhaps, for you guys? So at the end of each session, I always ask you guys, okay, how was that? How was that experience? Is there anything we can do to sort of improve your three major trends? And the next slide is basically laboratory training. So in other words, these are some examples of what we call interventions, change interventions that we could do to help employees deal with change. So in the old days, we used to do what we call T groups. Kurt Lewin's research. Kurt Lewin is a very famous and very preeminent researcher on organizational change, and he came up with the Lewin's change model, which we'll be studying in the near future. Now, he also came up with an intervention called T groups. So in other words, it's an unstructured group in which participants learn from their own interactions and about issues such as interpersonal relations, personal growth, leadership, and group dynamics. So what this is usually when you conduct this intervention, you sit around in a group. Usually it is a face-to-face group, so you don't necessarily have to do it online. It can be done online, but usually it's held. Companies would hold roundtable discussions with their employees, and they discuss not just business-oriented or procedures or processes, but they look at how can we work better together? How can we improve our relationships so that we can work better as a team? So that's an example of an intervention, and we'll explain more about that in the future. Nowadays, these T groups have turned into what we call team building. So organizations want to improve the teamwork within their groups. So what they do is they do a T style or T group style development, which is done again in business and industry. So organizational development, one of the first interventions that organizational development got into is again team building. You might have heard about team building that's conducted in different places in different manners. So one novel way that they do this is you simply go out as a team, have drinks perhaps, or go out and have a very casual get together in a party perhaps. And the reason why we do that is to build better relationships with each other. Other team building interventions can include things like what we call a ropes course, or just teams playing games with each other. And again, I'm going to show you some videos in the future which gives you an idea on exactly what these team building interventions are. All right, so other approaches that are quite common nowadays is what we call the action research feedback model. Now again, Lewin appears again along with Collier and White. They found that this action research framework is actually, if you link action with research, it can be very useful in managing change. So what do you mean exactly by linking action with research? Well, it really means that before you make an action, you do a survey and find out first, what is needed to be done. Each situation is different, so you want to know what this actual situation is before you try to implement change. It also means that there is no one-stop shop. There is no one framework that you could use which applies to every single situation. Every situation is different. You need to find out, if you are the consultant or the organizational development practitioner, you need to find out first what the situation is by doing a survey. In other words, research. That a survey is a type of research. So again, as we practice it in today's world, OD practitioners are using these cycles and surveys to gather information first about a situation before they implement a change. Okay, another very common concept that's running nowadays in the world of organizational development is what we call participative management. So what that simply means is that organizations are getting their employees to make decisions or to at least suggest decisions. So it's not just the old-fashioned way of making decisions where the manager or the leader is the only person that thinks about the situation, and he's the only one that makes decisions and is the only one that comes up with a solution. We've learned through the years that you need to get your employees involved in problem solving, get them involved in suggesting for ways on how to improve a situation in an organization. So Likert actually has these four systems that he talks about. And in the old-fashioned way is what we call an exploitative, authoritative system, a very autocratic system. So we're saying that this in the 1960s and 1970s, perhaps, the approach was you would have a leader and he doesn't listen to his people. He just makes decisions on his own. And they're very authoritative, which means you can't really question their authority. Now that moved as time went on into a more what we call benevolent authoritative system. So very paternalistic. There's a little bit of interaction, but really not that much. Communication is usually from the top going down, and there's hardly any consultation. Mind you, there are still many companies out there that are still what we call having a benevolent authoritative system. So, the managers are still making decisions without any consultation. But the modern way is moving into number 3 and number 4. Number 3 is consultative, where we are increasing the involvement of workers in making decisions. And this is really important because in change, if we want to be successful in implementing change, we have to get the workers involved because the change affects them, and they are the ones that can tell us how we can implement change, get them to cooperate, and the best way is to consult with them. An even better way is more than just consulting. We're actually getting them involved in decision making. So it's not the manager who's making a decision. The manager gets the input from the workers, and then he tells them, okay, what do you think is the best way we can solve this problem in the organization? And what kind of changes do we need? And what kind of changes do we, the employees, have to do in order for us to solve the problems that we have in an organization? So that's more participative because the manager is now getting the employees involved in not just decision making, but also in problem solving. All right, there is a limit to what organizational development can do. Nowadays, there's a lot of organization transformation that's going on. In other words, a lot of situations mean that we can't plan for change. It just happens. Again, a perfect example would be the coronavirus situation. If this is a crisis, we need to approach and respond very quickly, and we need to fix the situation very quickly. And it's something that's very unpredictable. So planning is quite difficult, as mentioned here. So usually when you have an organizational transformation, this is stemming from what is happening outside. It's not something that's happening or that started within the organization. It is something that started outside of the organization. So this virus, for example, that's affecting CIC, this is something that happened outside of CIC. And now, because of that external situation, the company, CIC, or the organization, needs to change, needs to come up with systems that will address this external threat. So it's a very different leadership style. And organizational transformation oftentimes will require a very dictatorial or very authoritative leadership style in order for us to get things done. So there may not be enough time to consult, may not be enough time to have a participative discussion. But as much as possible, whenever possible, we should still get input from employees. So OT, or organizational transformation, is often regarded as revolutionary because it's a very quick change. And OD, organizational development, is more evolutionary. So I'll give you an example of an OD situation. Perhaps maybe a year from now, when all of this is over, and we want to implement just a project for the organization. For example, we want to learn more about a particular software. For example, Teams. Teams is a collaborative software that we're currently using, but we want to be the employees to be more adept at using it. So that can be easily planned because we're just using that. We're going into a step-by-step way of learning about this software, and there's no crisis that we are what we are facing. We're just learning it in preparation for the future. So that's something we can plan for. Okay, that's it for